Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bayou Bets for Thursday, August the 24th, 2023. I am Jim Derry. He is not Spencer Urquhart. He is Gabe Henderson, and he is taking the place of Spencer. No Guru today. Guru is taking the day off, and so that doesn't mean the show ends. Doesn't mean there's not going to be a show. Of course there's going to be a show, and we have some topics for you. And they are, of course, the Saints are preparing to play the Houston Texans on Sunday night in the Caesars Superdome. We will talk about how long the starters should play, if they should play at all. And, we're going to get into that because I think there are some reasons why I think both of us think they should or shouldn't play. We're not going to give it away just yet. Jimmy Graham is back. Will he make this team? Will the quote-unquote medical episode keep him from making this team or not keep him from making this team? Or will it have nothing to do at all with whether he makes that team? This is coming up. LSU's Maason Smith is suspended for signing autographs. Yeah, in this day and age, he got suspended for signing autographs. We're going to have a nice little debate on that. We welcome your comments and questions as we go along here. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, which we hope you are. By the way, if you aren't, please subscribe to the Bayou Bets YouTube channel, no matter where you're watching. That way you'll always know when we're on. And then we're going to have a very brief Tour Championship update. Some new odds as Scotty Scheffler was running away with it for a little while, and that has changed. So we're going to talk about that very briefly in a little end, and then Gabe and I will both have our rants. Spencer Crawford says, hell no. I don't even know what he's saying hell no to.
Probably the Jimmy Graham question.
Will Jimmy Graham make the team? Okay. Well, one of us is taking that side. I will just tell you that. I'm not going to tell you exactly which one of us or how strongly we feel about it, but that's coming up shortly. But we want to tell you, once again, reminder to subscribe to the Bayou Bets channel. And I forgot to put the new graphic on the screen, but Caesars Sportsbook is the official sponsor of bet.NOLA.com, and they have a new promotion right now. If you have not signed up with them yet, if you bet $50, if you're a new subscriber, $250 you get back in free bets. That has already started. And you can go to bet.NOLA.com to get that offer. So we welcome you to do that. All right, let's talk about the Saints, Gabe. And they are playing your Houston Texans on Sunday in the Superdome. How much should the starters play?
I think for both teams, there's a lot of questions surrounding depth, and obviously we'll get to the whole Jimmy Graham situation later. So, I think as for the starters, maybe a few drives, maybe the first quarter. I don't really think we need to see a lot of them unless it comes to positions where there's some question marks. And on both teams, I think it's safe to say there's a lot of those.
I think there's no question that you're right about that. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you will see totals on Saints futures and the Saints win total. We posted earlier this week, I think it was Tuesday when we posted it, all sorts of Saints odds that are interesting. Even if you don't bet, even if you just like looking at lines and odds, it's a pretty interesting thing to go through. There are about 50 different, and there are more than 50 things you can bet when it comes to Saints on or against. But I put together about 50 of them, and it's kind of interesting to go through. The numbers you see on the screen at the bottom down there haven't changed very much as of late. Saints still minus 180 to make the playoffs. I think they're plus 150 to miss the playoffs. So obviously Vegas thinks that the Saints are going to make the playoffs, but these numbers, Gabe, also tell me, and I'm going to give you my opinion on the Stars in just a second, but I think it's interesting because these numbers to me tell me that the Vegas bookmakers think there will be more than one team from the NFC South to make the playoffs. Why do I say that? Because they're only plus 105 to win the NFC South, but they're minus 180 to make the playoffs. That is a huge difference. And because of the easy schedules, and we'll get to the NFC South team previews in a week after next, but this tells me Vegas thinks at least two teams are coming out of the South.
I agree. It's really interesting to see that, they are the favorite to win the NFC South, but with plus odds, and then they're minus 180 to make the playoffs. So, I think looking at the Saints' easy schedule, looking at their win total, and given the nature of the NFC, a little weaker this season, especially when you look at divisions like the West. And depending on how you feel about the North, even the North, they have clear-cut favorites, and the other teams are kind of just there.
Yeah.
So I think, you're going to get multiple teams out of the South and the East. And I think the odds indicate that.
I think that is the case. All right, back to about the starters on Sunday. And my opinion is this: I think this team is far from a finished product, and we have seen some sloppiness over the course of the past couple of weeks, especially last week in Las Vegas. I almost said Las Vegas. In Los Angeles, they had all the issues, not just during the game with the second string offense and defense, but they also had it during the practice sessions against the Chargers. So I think the starters need to get in there. It used to be that preseason game number 3, you'd see starters for a half. I don't think you're going to see that. No, I mean, I don't think you should really. But at the same time, I think we're so worried about guys getting hurt. Look, they're going to play 17 games. I think it's worth the risk of putting them in for at least a quarter or a quarter and a half to get a little bit more cohesiveness. If anything else, Derek Carr needs to get on the same page with his real uniform on, throw it to some of these receivers that he's never really thrown to. Besides all that, Gabe, I think the Saints don't really even know. We're going to talk about the depth at receiver. I think that's going to be a bigger topic for next week. But, there's not a ton of depth on this receiving core.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you'll get into it more next week, and we'll even touch on it a little bit, perhaps in the Jimmy Graham situation. But yeah, I mean, and that's why I think it is important, as you mentioned. I'm on the same page as you. They should play at least a quarter, if not a half. Just to get that familiarity. I mean, we are essentially 2 weeks away from season opener. So I think it's important to get them a little more playing time than they've gotten, as much as you do want to see the depth and answer those questions about roster cuts.
Yep, and they're going to have to make those decisions pretty darn soon. It's hard to believe that we are just, I think, 16 days away from the start of the season. September the 10th in the Caesars Superdome against Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, and the Tennessee Titans. It should be an interesting game. Tennessee, they're having their own issues. They've got some injuries as well. Again, we'll talk about that probably the week leading up to the game, but Tennessee's got some issues coming up. I'm sure Saints fans won't boo-hoo over it. All right, let's move on to topic number 2, because it's going to be kind of a controversial one, and one that we spent a lot of time talking about in pre-production today. So if that's any if that's any sign, we might have some comments from some viewers. And again, you are more than welcome. We'd love to have you talk to us here at Bayou Bets. Just type into the comments if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll be glad to show it. As before we even talk about it, Mark Zatanovich says tickets are $7 right now on the secondary market. Stub, is that like the black market for tickets, Mark? The secondary, is there a secondary market? I don't know what that is. StubHub, Saints game at the Superdome.
That's the Houston Texans effect, Jim. I got $14 almost field level seats for their home opener. So
okay, all right. Tulane football, maybe a top 20 team. I agree, Mark. I think they should be a top 20 team. We're not going to spend a whole bunch of time talking about Tulane today, but we will before the season starts. We'll definitely have a Tulane segment or two. I think Tulane belongs in the top 20. They're number 24 right now. I had this debate on Datitude last week with Garland Gillen, and I think Tulane should be a top 25 team. He's an AP top 25 voter, and he had him at 17. So I think there's a good chance they will be in the top 20, especially if they beat South Alabama. That line is going down, by the way. Tulane is now -6. They were a 7-point favorite just a few days ago. That is going down to -6. So some money coming on South Alabama. And then, interestingly, when they play Ole Miss, that's the game I'm looking for. If they can win those 2 games, there's zero question they'll be in the top 20. All right, Mark, I'm going to get to your question in just a minute, but the topic as of right now, Jimmy Graham has returned from his quote-unquote medical episode. What are the odds that he makes this team? Gabe, let's just start with that part. Do you think he's going to make the team or
not? To answer the question directly, yes, I do. And I'll get into my side, I guess, first as to why I think he will. I think, Jim, you know me well. I come from an advertising background, and I don't think the Saints would have paraded him around the whole, oh, look who's back. It's a team legend, Jimmy Graham. Everyone loves him. Here he is. They wouldn't have done that if they were going to eventually cut him. I think it would be too unpopular a move. We mentioned in pre-production, he's going to sell jerseys. And when you get into the 50s, and you get those depth pieces, even though he is a fourth string tight end, you don't find those that'll sell jerseys, and Jimmy Graham's going to sell jerseys. So I think it's going to be too hard and too unpopular a decision to cut him at this point.
Oh, well, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about being contrarian. I might be a little nervous here with my response. I don't agree with you, Gabe. I think that the Saints, I don't think they necessarily care about public opinion. If they have any common sense on this team, and, there may be people out here there that disagree with me when I say this, but there is zero need on this team for a fourth string tight end, because that's what Jimmy Graham is at this point in his career. And if you don't consider a Taysom Hill a tight end, that's fine. Then he's a third string tight end. And sure, you need 3 tight ends, maybe. Some teams don't have 3. Some teams only have 2. You mentioned that the Texans have 4, but I think they're all young guys who and the Texans we're not expecting the Texans to be a 10 or 11 win team, are we? I mean, it's possible.
It'd be nice, but no, there's no way it happens.
So I think that a team that has the kind of talent that the Saints have don't really have room for a fourth string tight end. And that's, again, whatever is going on with Jimmy Graham and his medical diagnosis or whatever, it worries me that someone has a quote unquote seizure. That's what they think it was. That's what Dr. Amos says he thought it was. And we were talking about pre-production. You've had experience seeing people with seizures before, Gabe, and so that they are able to do things. But to me, going out and walking to the drugstore or going out to a restaurant is a lot different than playing football. And so to me, it makes me nervous. And again, I'm not the one that had a seizure, so why does it make a difference? It makes me nervous. But as far as this team goes, I'm sure that they're nervous from their liability standpoint. If they're throwing a guy out there who just had a seizure, is he going to be able to contribute to this team?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think his contributions to the team have to do with the seizure. As far as the seizure goes, obviously we're not going to know much. Neither of us are going to pretend to be professionals in the medical field. I do have a little bit of experience with loved ones having seizures. And, at the end of the day, I have seen them have a seizure in the same day, perform regular tasks. But as you mentioned, playing football is no regular task. And to that, I would say the loved ones that I have are nowhere near as athletic as Jimmy Graham. So even at his age, he's still a freak athlete. And, only he knows the day if he can play or not. But I think regardless of his health, I don't think he's someone who's going to contribute a lot. I think at least, if nothing else, we agree on that.
Well, right now it's his decision whether he still plays football or not. But very soon it won't necessarily be his decision because the Saints are going to have to make one. As you said before, if he does make this team, he's going to be like the 52nd or 53rd guy to make this team. Is that where you want to? To me, I'd rather see some young and upcoming prospect kind of guy, some player that is going to on the fringe of whether he can contribute long term to this team. That's what I would rather see on this team. So to me, Jimmy Graham gives you no benefit. There is no benefit to having Jimmy Graham on this team. I don't understand it. People thinking that he's going to be even half of a shell of what he used to be, they're kidding themselves. We had the debate about Michael Thomas. If tonight you can watch on the Final Bet on Fox 8. I'm on there with Garland Gillen and Juan Kincaid, and we spent about 5 minutes talking about Michael Thomas. I mean, it's not realistic for Michael Thomas to even be anything close to what he was. And I think for Jimmy Graham, it's either further away. I mean, Michael Thomas is at least 30 years old, either 29 or 30. I can't remember, but he's still in that range where he can still be athletic enough to contribute. I think he's going to do more than contribute. Will he be good enough to be a number 2 receiver? We'll have to wait and see. But Jimmy Graham, he's 34, 35 years old and having medical events. And I just don't understand what anyone thinks the benefit of having him on this team would be.
I'm surprised because we talked about it earlier. I'm surprised he was back at practice so quickly.
Yeah,
because if there is any debate as to whether he makes the team, and I guess him being at practice and the lack of talk around Jimmy Graham potentially being cut, it kind of answers the question. But at the end of the day, the fact that he's back at practice kind of shows that no one sat him down and said, hey, this is a good out. you're not obviously well, we don't know, as we've mentioned, it's a medical episode, but he's not in the best of shape. He's in his mid-30s. He's been away from football for a little bit, and he is a fringe player. I think it's regardless of whether or not he gets cut, it is safe to say he's a fringe player.
That is a nice way to put it.
Yeah, if there was any question as to whether or not he was going to get cut, you'd think the Saints would sit him down and say, hey, we can use this whole medical episode, kind of transition you to an off-the-field role. I'm just spitballing here, but the fact that he's back at practice is surprising, and I think that's a sign that
I think it's a sign that he's desperate. That's what I think. I think it's a sign because you saw what Dennis Allen said the day before. We expect Jimmy Graham to be back out here. In other words, if you want to make this team, you better get your ass back out there. I mean, that's what that said, and he was out there the next day. So I think that that's what it is. So we'll find out soon enough. Mr. Horace is with us. Good afternoon, Mr. Horace Urquhart. And he's saying he can't. Well, if I can click, there we go. He can't make a judgment since he hasn't seen him at practices. I mean, he's been out there. He's just not playing with the ones. And honestly, not necessarily playing with the twos all the time either. So look, and I mean every. I mean, the word every and all is used way too much, but I'm telling you that every single reporter that I've talked to that covers this team has said that Jimmy Graham's going to make the team. I talked about being on Final Bet tonight. When I was in their newsroom yesterday, Sean Fazan was in there, absolutely going to make the team. I mean, these are the same people who said the Saints would all would win more than 9 games last year, and they were all wrong, including me, by the way. But so we take words like that and predictions with grains of salt. I just think that anyone with realistic expectations and what would be best for this team, unless I'm just missing something, I don't understand why it's in the Saints' best interest for Jimmy Graham to make this team, a guy who hasn't played football for well over a year. And when he did play in 2021, I think only played in 6 games for the Bears. So, I mean, someone's going to have to explain why a guy who his own volition, not like Michael Thomas who's been injured, but a guy just by his own volition basically has only played 6 games in 2 years. What makes him worthy of playing right now? I mean, that's going to – we'll see. We'll see who's right, but that's definitely something that's going to come up. All right. This one ought to be interesting. We're going to move on and talk about LSU. We're going to wrap it up, by the way, with our rants. I will come back to the Saints because I have if you haven't been around and you haven't heard the news, a key former member of the Saints coaching staff way back from the day passed away last night, and that is going to be my rant. Gabe's going to talk about Houston Texans quarterback situation. That's all coming up in about 10 minutes or so. But we want to talk about LSU a little bit. We have not spent enough time, I think, talking about LSU. Only a little over a week away from their opener, Tulane as well. You see on the bottom of the screen. Saturday, they take on South Alabama at Yulman Stadium. LSU will be playing in Orlando, I think at Camping World Stadium in Orlando on September the 3rd as they take on Florida State. In a game, to me, the winner of that game is in the top 5. There's no question about it. And the question of the day, as you see some of the futures there at the bottom of the screen, is this. LSU's Maason Smith was suspended for signing autographs. The thing here is he was suspended. He was supposed to be suspended towards the end of last year, but he got hurt, and so they had to postpone the suspension. But the reason why he was suspended is because when he signed these autographs, he did so before the NIL was in effect, okay? And so at the time when he signed them, it was against NCAA rules and policy. Whether you agree with rules and policy then and now, it was against the rules, Gabe Henderson. So is this silly that he's being suspended now?
I think it is. I think it's the NCAA trying to cover its own behind. I mean, I don't know if you've seen headlines recently, but they're still stuck up on the whole Reggie Bush thing, which I think is an absolute farce. I'm of the belief that Reggie Bush should get his Heisman back. I think Johnny Manziel should keep his. I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame.
What about OJ?
That's a different story. That's
Zoe's not happy that I'm just saying all these people should get their Heisman back. I'm wondering about OJ.
No, I mean,
I to get it back.
There's a big difference between what OJ did and what
I'm just asking.
Bush
It's
is.
just
You
a
and I
question.
both know
Calm
that.
down.
But no, I mean, I think, yeah, I think it's a farce. And Maason Smith has missed at this point, most of his career at LSU. I think he played in 7 games his freshman year, and he played in a quarter, a half last season. Maybe I think it was even a drive because he was celebrating getting a stop.
Yeah.
He's missed most of his LSU career at this point through injury. Hasn't he already been punished enough? I mean, we're punishing him for something that he did a few seasons ago before NIL was a thing. But NIL, the wheels were already spinning there. And he did something that is now legal. So I think it's truly the NCAA looking to stay consistent in this amid the whole Reggie Bush thing. And, I think it's just an absolute farce, if we're being honest.
Well, I have 2 young children and grandchildren. So I will say this, the wheels on the bus go round and around. What does that mean? That means I think that he broke a rule. And if you break rules, you should be punished. Whether you break them 10 years ago and they were okay then, it wasn't okay then, but it's okay now. Just because it's okay now doesn't mean it was okay to break a rule. I don't understand this whole thing. And, El Rey wants to call me a hypocrite. Because when you're saying the NCAA is hypocrites, he's basically calling me a hypocrite. Zoe's calling me a hypocrite. Everybody's calling me a hypocrite. I mean, I just don't understand, like any facet of life. And I mean any facet of life. If you break a rule or you break a law, when you break it, you should be punished for it. I'm not saying he should have the book thrown against him, but I don't understand what the big deal is about him being suspended a game for doing something he wasn't supposed to do.
I think my biggest thing here is the fact that the NCAA,
to be 25 years old again, by the way.
The NCAA is going back retroactively and suspending him for something he did before NIL. And he's coming off a season-ending injury. So it just seems harsh to me. It seems unnecessary even. And I get it. Maason Smith's a great player, and LSU will be just fine without him in one game. I think Mekhi Wingo is a guy who didn't get talked about enough. He was fantastic last year. So, I mean, to me, it's just silly.
Zoe says the suspension for 1 game doesn't match the crime. But here's my question. Where do you draw the line? Okay. Let's say, I don't know. I'm going to just say Mike Smith was playing for, I don't know, playing for any college, any state university. Okay. And he was working for a car dealership because the car dealership owner went to any state university. And this is before NIL. And he was getting like 50 grand under the table. And they didn't find out until, now that would be okay to get 50 grand under the table, basically, because all he'd have to do is go do a commercial for this guy and this dealership. But we find out later on that he was getting this money before NIL was legal. Would that be worthy of a suspension? Where do we draw the line? What rules do we say are okay to be broken? When they were rules, they were broken. But now I don't understand what the difference is.
I don't think we draw a line. I don't think the NCAA knows or has defined a line because, I mean, if you've seen, Johnny Manziel openly admitted to signing autographs and making money, and his Heisman Trophy is still there. They haven't taken his away, and they took Reggie Bush's away. So, I mean, the NCAA is just so inconsistent.
I don't disagree with that part of it.
And here's the thing. With Maason Smith, let me ask you this, Jim. When LSU self-imposed a bowl ban during the 2020 season, what did you think of that? Do you think the NCAA should go back and punish LSU? Because let's be honest, that was a load of crap. They weren't going to make a bowl game.
Correct.
Anyway. And even if they would have, it would have been, for example, the Birmingham Bowl. I mean,
no, I completely agree. It was we're going to jump out in front of this bus, and the bus already swerved and is 2 blocks down the street. I understand that. That doesn't.
Yes,
so
this is the same thing. I mean, Maason Smith missed all of last year.
We've got a comment. We've got a comment from a reader or viewer. I'm sorry, I'm old. Your viewers now. States that legalize weed throughout past misdemeanor convictions. Not all states. Not every state has. And whether does that make it right or wrong? I mean, obviously, look, I understand that I'm taking a side because I'm probably older. I'm stubborn in my ways, staunch, whatever you want to call it. I get that. But that's the way that I believe. I believe if you break a law or you break a rule, at the time you broke the law or broke the rule, you don't get grandfathered out of something. You don't, I mean, what are we going to call that? You got granddaughtered out of a rule. I mean, it's the opposite of being grandfathered in, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, if you broke a rule or broke a law, shouldn't you be punished for breaking a rule or breaking a law? And they say, oh no, it's not a law or rule anymore. It's okay that you broke it.
See, I think because it's not a rule anymore, that's why I believe that it's a bit unfair to punish him now in relation to the bowl thing. LSU wasn't going to make a bowl. They broke rules then, but that punishment was sufficient enough for the NCAA to say, all right, that's fine. So I think the NCAA should look at this similarly, and they should say, you know what? Maason Smith missed all of last season through injury. Why do we need to punish him 2 years down the line for one game? I mean, honestly, if it had come out that Maason Smith was signing autographs before NIL, I don't think anyone would be batting an eye consider if they didn't punish him at all because he missed the entirety of last season. So,
I and kind of behind the scenes, that's kind of the argument that Zoe's making at this point in time, but that's not what the argument was before. I think it's kind of now evolving into that. And I don't necessarily have a problem with, he missed all of last season or he did this or whatever, but that's not the argument. The argument is whether he should be suspended for a rule that he broke. So I don't know. I'm not, this is a bad, I don't even know what the word I'm looking for, but this is a bad representation, I guess, of how I feel about this. But to me, because this is a minor thing, in my opinion, signing autographs is a minor thing, whether it happened 20 years ago, 40 years ago, because honestly, you might not, you might be surprised to hear me say this, but I think college football players should get paid. I mean, I think they should get paid by the universities, but it's not legal for them to do so. I think the NCAA is a bunch of Gestapo bastards, if you ask me. I mean, that's who I think they are. I think they are the biggest hypocrites on the planet. So for me to defend them, I guess, is kind of, it goes against what I believe in, because, they're making millions and millions, maybe billions of dollars off of these athletes. So these athletes should benefit. But that being said, that's not the rules that are in place. So, I mean, I'm just one to believe. And again, it could be because I'm an old man. I just think if you break a law or break a rule, no matter when it was, even if it's legal now, that doesn't make it okay.
Let's agree on one thing. So while we disagreed on the punishment, let's at least agree on this. If LSU was opening the season with McNeese State, no one would care.
That's true. And we probably would barely be talking about it.
It's the only reason people care. And here's one thing that that we haven't mentioned is he was signing autographs with Kayshon Boutte, who served his suspension last year, according to Brian Kelly, or according to sources, when he had the birth of his child and he had the flu in 2 non-important non-conference games. He played against Florida State. He committed the same crime. So I just don't think there's been enough consistency from the NCAA or hell, even the school in this regard. And I think Maason Smith should be able to take the field on September 3rd against Florida State.
Well, we'll see if Kayshon Boutte gets suspended from the NFL. Oh, no, wait. I mean, just cut from the Patriots. That's a whole different story.
He's going to make that roster.
You think? I don't. I think he has a better chance to make the Patriots roster than Jimmy Graham has to make the Saints. But we'll see. All right. Before we get to our rants, we want to have a little update on the Tour Championship, in case you haven't noticed. And judging by the attendance, you haven't. The Tour Championship, Scotty Scheffler started fast, but from the time I typed that in to now, not as much so. And the odds of about a half an hour ago, I don't have the numbers on my screen, but his 5-stroke lead was whittled to 1. He was down to 11 under. He had dropped from 13 under to 11 under. And hence, I don't think I've seen a plus 128. But that's what Scotty Scheffler was right before we went on the air. And he was like minus 150 earlier today. So he's dropped from -150 to +128. Some good numbers on this board. I still like Jon Rahm. He was only 5 strokes back as we went on the air here. He bogeyed a couple holes in a row as well. But this is a long tournament, only 5 strokes back. I like Jon Rahm. I like this tournament for him at +1400. Got any thoughts? I know you're not a huge golf guy, but do you have any thoughts on the Tour Championship?
Well, in our pre-production, I mentioned that if there was someone who was going to catch Scheffler at the time, now not knowing that he's now tied for 4th, it was Victor Hovland, who is now tied for the lead at 10 under. So,
fantastic!
Yeah,
he was part of our best. He's part of our best bets from yesterday. So that's who we liked in our best bets. We liked Hovland to win the whole thing, and we liked Jon Rahm to finish in the top 5. As of now, it's Thursday. It's early. Could get that right. Time to move on our rants. We're going to start with you, Gabe, and talking about the Houston Texans.
Yeah, Jim, the Houston Texans are, and I know many people don't care or know this, but because we know who's going to be the starting quarterback for the Houston Texans when they take the field against the Baltimore Ravens in week 1, it's going to be C.J. Stroud, their top 3 pick. The Houston Texans are the last team in the NFL to announce a starting quarterback. According to D'Amico Ryans, it is still a quarterback competition. And Jim, I know every team has a date stuck in their mind that, they don't like to relive when it comes to their team. September 10th, 2017 is one of mine. Because Bill O'Brien trotted out Tom Savage for a half against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Texans got trounced. Gave up 23 points in the first half, went on to lose 29-7. But many people will remember that Deshaun Watson was on that roster. He came out for the second half. And while I do believe C.J. Stroud will be the Texans' number 1, here we are, the last team to name a starting quarterback, still a quarterback competition, which I thought from the off, I said this a few weeks ago on Fantasy Roundup, I think it's an absolute farce to call it a quarterback competition. Davis Mills is not starting for this team. And I know how you feel about Anthony Richardson, and I know you don't think he should necessarily be the starter in Indy.
But he's politely. That's putting it mildly.
Bryce Young has been named the starter. Hell, the Commanders and the Buccaneers have named starting quarterbacks, Jim. And the Houston Texans are still keeping it under wraps for all intents and purposes, even though we know it's going to be C.J. Stroud. So I just think they're wasting everybody's time calling it a quarterback competition. Davis Mills will not start a game, barring injury, for the Texans this year.
I got to say, if Baker Mayfield has already been named starting quarterback, then I don't understand why C.J. Stroud should already have been named quarterback. We've disagreed on a few things in the show, but I 100% agree with you here. It doesn't make any sense. However, that being said, I think D'Amico Ryans is really going to turn this team around. I don't think it's going to be this year. I think they have a good enough defense to compete in a lot of games. And I think that I really hope, Lord knows anyone who's watched me over the past few years knows what I think about Ohio State quarterbacks. Sorry, Zoe. That includes the best one, maybe the best one ever. I mean, Justin Fields, that just goes to show how bad Ohio State quarterbacks have been. I mean, whether you like Justin Fields or not, you could make an argument that he's the best quarterback in the history of the NFL that ever played at Ohio State, which is really saying something.
Well, if you're discounting Joe Burrow.
Of course.
Who Ohio State fans will still try and claim, which is farce.
Get out of here. That doesn't count.
Yeah, but no, I was in the room with you when D'Amico Ryans got hired by the Texans. You know how excited I was, so I completely agree with you there.
Well, I think he's going to turn that team around. And look, in the AFC South, you don't have to be great to be good. That's good. That should be their new mantra. You don't have to be great to be good. All right, my rant is on here, and again, I'm old. Steve Sidwell passed away last night, and in case you don't know who Steve Sidwell is, he is a former defensive coordinator of the New Orleans Saints, but not just that. And, when I saw this picture, I tried to name all 5 of these guys behind him. I was able to get 4 of 5. I got 1 wrong. And when I mistakenly thought that Jim Wilkes on the left was Jumpy Geathers. But anyway, got the other 4, including Hall of Famer Sam Mills, number 51 there, second from the right. But Steve Sidwell was one of the co-authors of the Dome Patrol and was a huge reason why the Saints went from being this moribund franchise for over the first almost 20 years of their existence to becoming relevant and to becoming I wouldn't say perennial playoff team, but a team that was normally in the conversation. It was early part of the Saints' greatness. It was because of their defense. Again, the Dome Patrol, maybe the best 4 linebackers that ever played together. And Steve Sidwell was the defensive coordinator for those early years and under Jim Mora. He went on to, he went on to be a coach at for the Houston Oilers, as we talked about in pre-production. He also was coaching as late as the early 2000s as a defensive assistant in Seattle. So Steve Sidwell not only missed in the football community, but was a big part of the Saints franchise. And Jim Mora, who we had on Datitude podcast last year, and who is now 88 years old, looking like he's 68. I want to look like him when I'm 88. Had a lot of good things to say about Steve Sidwell, and I know he's a big fan, and he will certainly be missed. Passed away last night at the age of 78. Well, Gabe, what are you looking for before we run today? What are you looking for this weekend? What are you looking for Sunday night?
I'm looking at, from a Texans point of view, I'm looking at their wide receivers and I'm looking at their offensive line just because there's a lot of question marks there with injuries. With the receivers, it's a lot of inexperience. Robert Woods, someone who on the Tennessee Titans didn't play that well last year. He looks to have developed a nice little connection with C.J. Stroud. So I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I know you will have a lot of things you're looking at in terms of the Saints.
For sure, and I will be out there at the Caesars Superdome on Sunday. I'll be live tweeting throughout the game on some of the things that I see and maybe just different perspective. And speaking of my own perspective, tomorrow, Datitude Podcast, starting at 9:30 instead of 10. I know we had switched the time. We'll be on at 10 a.m. live here on all these same social media channels. We will have WWL Radio Saints analyst Mike Detillier will be coming on the show. It's always fun to have Mike on the show. I mean, just not, if anything else, to listen to that Cajun accent for an hour. He is fantastic, and he knows the ins and outs. And Bobby Hebert won't be interrupting him every 5 seconds. So that's also a plus. Tomorrow on the Datitude Podcast. Meanwhile, here in Bayou Bets, we thank you for joining us. And a reminder, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Gabe, thanks for joining us. And Spencer will be back on Monday. So it was a good show. Nice, lively debate. Zoe had her record for eye rolls and shaking of the head back behind you can't see her back there, but she shook her head more this show, I think, than any other show we've ever had. So that's kind of exciting news, by the way.
I think I could have seen that coming from pre-production.
Yeah. I think it was pretty obvious. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the Saints game. We will see you tomorrow on Datitude. We will see you Monday on Bayou Bets. Until then, peace and love, my friends.